Así es el mundo en el que ahora me ves, pero no fue siempre así. Antes no sabía ver, market a la vista y yo sin internet. NFT, soy un NFT, desentérate. NFT, soy un token no fungible, en tu wallet es posible.
Hoy tenemos un programa muy especial, particularmente a mí me da mucho orgullo, es un honor poder entrevistar a dos figuras que ahora se las vamos a mostrar, quienes estén viendo y quienes estén escuchando ahora van a escuchar también quiénes son. Y todo esto igualmente lo podemos hacer gracias a nuestros sponsors, a Globant, que desde el principio nos están bancando. Ellos tienen grandes talentos con todas las novedades e innovaciones, son pioneros y parte del capitalismo tecnológico nacional. Y tenemos ahora el momento de Tech Trends, las tendencias de tecnología, robótica, inteligencia artificial, de la mano de la gente de Globant, que sí, tal vez no solo escuchás más sobre ellos, sino que los ves en más lugares porque están sponsoreando deportes diversos, así que puede ser que por ahí aparezcan. La realidad es que es una de las compañías creadas en Argentina, líderes a nivel mundial. Es de una de las más importantes. Todo esto es cierto, no es chamullo, si no, no lo estaría diciendo. No me caracteriza la idea de la mentira. ¿Con qué vamos hoy con Tech Trends? Bueno, básicamente cómo la inteligencia artificial está involucrada en la industria automotriz. Y para que te des una idea, hay unas 3.700 personas que por día se mueren en accidentes en vehículos de tránsito. Y ¿qué puede servir como para encontrar alguna manera de reducir ese número? Tal vez podría ser la inteligencia artificial, por su capacidad de predecir, por su manera de poder leer el entorno y que también, según, esto es muy importante, quien programe, o sea, toda la parte ética en la programación para poder tomar decisiones es clave en estos procesos. Así que hoy en día se está usando en la industria automotriz. Por ejemplo, tenemos inteligencia artificial y vehículos autónomos que, como te decía, tienen esta tecnología para poder identificar qué hay a su alrededor. Ahí hay algunas marcas que están introduciendo específicamente ChatGPT, de hecho, para poder dar una experiencia más efectiva, más eficiente a los clientes, a los usuarios. Microsoft y Mercedes-Benz están mejorando incluso la cadena de suministro con un sistema que se llama MO360 de Mercedes-Benz que conecta a 30 plantas de automóviles con Microsoft Cloud y así tiene una mirada macro alrededor del mundo de la mano de Microsoft y también de Mercedes-Benz. ¿Qué otra cosa más? También es una manera en la que se está involucrando la inteligencia artificial generativa. Incluso puede ser en la marca Toyota, que tiene directamente un chatbot para interactuar con los clientes. Esto es interesante porque cuando analizamos una industria, no se trata solamente de eso, de una cadena de suministro o que se trata específicamente del producto final, ¿no? El vehículo en sí mismo, sino que también hay experiencia de los usuarios en cuanto a, no sé, se rompió alguna parte del vehículo o que necesita hacer alguna consulta, porque, no sé vos, yo soy de las personas que lee los manuales de uso, todavía lo hago, me lo habían enseñado alguna vez que no sabía cómo resolver alguna situación y sí, me leí esas quizás 30 páginas, tal vez tenía tiempo de sobre y lo hacía, pero la realidad es que ibas aprendiendo cómo optimizar y usar mejor, en este caso, un vehículo. Pero mucha gente no tiene tiempo y también puede ser aburrido, así que por medio de chatbots específicos pueden brindarte ayuda ante alguna consulta. Mercedes-Benz también tiene algo similar con un chatbot que se llama Ask Mercedes. Y del lado también de GM están planteando la posibilidad de usar ChatGPT, inteligencia artificial, en los centros de atención a clientes. Incluso, ¿saben dónde se usa inteligencia artificial? En la parte del proceso del diseño de los vehículos. Eso también es interesante porque permite tener bocetos mucho más rápido que con la intervención humana puede llegar a tener diseños más específicos y probarlos, lo que hace que se reduzca tiempos y costos. Si quieren tener más información sobre las tendencias de tecnología, sobre tech trends, como te decía, inteligencia artificial, robótica, también procesos de negocios, bueno, por supuesto que pueden escanear el QR que está apareciendo en pantalla y ahí van a poder encontrar y saber más de todo el potencial creativo y transformador que tiene la inteligencia artificial de la mano de la gente de Globant. Ahí está el QR para que escaneen y sepan más de tendencias de tecnología. Y también a la gente de Cocos, con Cocos App, que hacen que la tecnología y las inversiones democraticen al mundo financiero, con más de 400.000 clientes. ¿Y qué es lo que tenemos hoy y por qué es tan relevante e importante hablar de este tema? Porque vamos a hablar de tecnología colaborativa y democracia. Hay una pregunta que es, ¿qué está pasando con la democracia? Si está cambiando, si se está cayendo, si se está perdiendo. Y tenemos a dos exponentes clave que son Audrey Tang y Glen Weyl. Welcome to Argentina. I'm going to give a little presentation. I'm going to switch to Spanish again, así me entienden. Who are Audrey Tang? Because I am a very big fan. Audrey is the first digital minister, es la primera ministra digital en Taiwán. Soy una fan, como les había dicho antes. Es una persona prodigio, desde muy chiquita ella había programado. Si quieren que les cuente, nació en 1981, empezó su carrera a los 8 años y abandonó la escuela secundaria a los 14 para fundar su primera empresa. O sea, para que te des una idea. Después empezó a desarrollarse con un enfoque bien innovador relacionado con software libre. Y en el 2016 fue nombrada primera ministra digital en Taiwán. Así que nos va a contar también, nosotros que desde Argentina decimos, ¿qué onda con Taiwán? Mucho no sabemos con nuestros problemas a diario. No tenemos mucha perspectiva en muchas ocasiones. También fue la primera persona transgénero en ocupar un cargo ministerial en su país y también eso es muy inspirador. Particularmente yo hice un documental que se llama Hackers en Democracia y ahí es donde conocí su trabajo y por eso es que también me parece un exponente clave. Y tenemos también a Glen Weyl, que se graduó como mejor estudiante en Princeton en el 2007 y obtuvo su doctorado en economía en el 2008. Antes de unirse a Microsoft, que también nos va a contar un poco eso, porque es interesante ver la mirada de alguien que trabaja en Microsoft y todo esto que tiene que ver con tecnología, democracia y que a veces nos asusta la inteligencia artificial, así que también por eso es importante el punto de vista que tiene para contarnos. Bueno, él hace investigaciones, es un líder en investigación en Microsoft y abarca temas como economía, derecho, informática, filosofía, ciencias políticas y biología, destacado en diferentes revistas. Básicamente estamos con dos capos, como le decimos acá en Argentina, dos cracks, gente que nos da mucha información y que es complejo a veces de entender, pero cuando escuchen de qué se trata van a ver que lo necesitamos y mucho. So now I'm going to speak in English. I have many questions, of course. You can say whatever you think. And first of all, how do you doing?
Yeah, we are very happy to be here with you, and we've traveled all around the world, 6 European cities in 11 days. And
In 11 days?
In 11 days, every city just 2 days,
No.
and this time like 5 different.
Yes, we're trying to be even
countries.
faster here in Latin
Right,
America.
exactly, because even more excitement.
It's like a very big party, no?
Exactly.
Yeah. And what do you think about Argentina? You are just how many hours? 2, 3 hours here.
3 hours so far.
Yeah, well, I like the weather better.
The weather, you like?
Yeah,
It's cooler than it was in Brasilia for sure.
Yeah, that's
yeah,
a very...
reminds me of Taiwan. Yeah.
Yes, Taiwan
Yeah.
is...
So during the autumn and the winter, it's this breezy feel. Yeah.
Okay. So we are talking about collaborative technology and democracy. And I said that I think that maybe it's going to be broke. I have the feeling related to democracy because I think that it's declining. And I want to start with this idea of Techlash, no? Because when I start to read the book, I don't finish the book. I started.
It weighs a kilo, so I don't blame you.
I try to it's very I feel something like there is a hope at the end, a techno-optimism in that book, Plurality. So, well, I want to know what is the idea of Techlash, Glen or Audrey, and because I think that it's part of the basis of the book.
Yeah, maybe Glenn would like.
Well, Techlash refers to the fact that in the last few years, you've mostly seen a lot of negative reaction against the tech world from democratic countries, especially European Union, but also the United States. The dominant reaction has been regulation. The dominant reaction has been fear, concern, a lot of very strong words, surveillance capitalism, this sort of thing, and maybe less investment, less positive vision, less direction for the industry, and more just consternation. And that's one side of the conversation that we think is sort of indicative of the divide that exists between technology and society today.
What do you think, Audrey?
Yeah, in Taiwan, we believe that democracy itself is a kind of social technology. So we aim to develop a positive vision, like instead of just complaining that social media polarizes people, we want to advance this vision that you can build pro-social media that unifies or at least depolarizes people. And so I think whether there's a techlash depends on how much agency people feel in steering the technology. In the places where people don't feel their hands are on the steering wheel, then they will hit the brakes very strongly. But in places where you can steer the wheel, then you still brake a little bit because you have to do that when you turn, but you don't hit all the way to the down.
Okay.
Yeah, I think in Taiwan, they don't really have a choice but to make democracy and technology work because their economy is 50% exports of technology, about 3 times what the next highest country is. And at the same time, their whole identity, survival, relies on democratic countries. So if either democracy or technology goes down, that's Taiwan's gone for you.
Yeah.
So they need to make them work together.
Yeah. Well, that's another question because we want to understand what is Taiwan, how we always feel like maybe it's on risk because of China and related to technology or the technology. This is a technological world. So if you can explain us as Argentinians, what is Taiwan and what was your role as first digital minister?
Yeah, Taiwan is 23 million people. We're the second most religiously diverse place on Earth. So my extended family have people like my grandparents in Catholics, but also Taoists, also Buddhists, also folk religion, and so on. And it's the place where people are getting more and more spiritual over time instead of less. And we have very highly educated cabinet members and so on as practicing religious people. And so it is a place where diversity, like 20 national languages, 16 of which indigenous. And the indigenous people tell me, I must say, it's just 16 macro languages. It's actually 42 languages, and so on. So we have very diverse backgrounds from being colonized by the Europeans, by the Qing dynasty, by Japan, and so on and so forth. And so people come from very different backgrounds. And just like our earthquakes, where there's 3 felt earthquakes on average every day in Taiwan somewhere.
Wow.
We're caught between the tectonic plates between the Pacific and the Eurasian. But that bumping into each other also made the tip of Taiwan, 4,000 meters high, grow half a centimeter every year. So we see conflict not as something to be avoided, but also something that can invite co-creation and rise higher. So that is the co-creational spirit of Taiwan. And we also invite people who contribute to open source, like on Ethereum, or on GitHub, anywhere, to be Taiwanese residents. It's called Taiwan Gold Card. So I don't know whether our new resident gold card holder, Glen Weyl, would like to say something.
Well, Audrey, Taiwan has two names. The jurisdiction has two names. One is Taiwan, and one is the Republic of China.
Yeah.
And the meaning of these is actually quite interesting because in the traditional indigenous language that Taiwan comes from, it means meeting place.
Nice.
And in the Chinese, from which the Republic of China comes, Zhonghua Mingguo, it means between cultures, citizen, country. And so another way of thinking of that is Transcultural Republic of Citizens. So you can think of Taiwan really as this place of the intersection of all these different forces.
Okay.
Yes, and you asked about my job. So I was for 8 years the digital minister. But in traditional Mandarin in Taiwan, 数位 means both digital and plural. So I'm also the minister for plurality, for pluralism. And this is important because when I first started working with the public service as a civic hacker in 2014.
Oh, I love that idea of civic hacker.
Yeah, I know. It's the idea of a hacker that doesn't attack a system, but builds better systems. Right? It's a constructive hacker.
Yeah.
So I work with the government, not for the government, throughout the past decade. And in 2014, the trust in democratic institutions in the administration was just 9%. So we started from a very polarized place. And then in 2018, as the digital/plural minister, we started institutionalizing a lot of the ways the civic hackers reconcile our differences, forking and merging. We can get to the details later. And the improvement was very visible when the government started trusting people. Some people start trusting back. So it's over 20% in 2018. And now in 2024, when my president, Dr. Tsai Ing-wen, finishes her second term on May 20th, the trust level to her administration is beyond 60%. And so a net 22% plus just over the past term alone. And so I think there's a lot to be said about depolarization, about bridge making, the way that we in the open source, free software, liberal world already learned about how to reconcile differences, can also on a national scale to foster pluralism.
Yeah. And I think that it's important that you said you work not for the government, you said with
the government.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I'm at kind of a Lagrange point, between the sun and the moon, or between the earth and the moon, between two celestial bodies. There are a few points.
Yeah.
And the Lagrange point that is in the middle between the two bodies has the same gravitational pull from the government on one side and the movements on the other. So it's not right, it's not left, it's not for the government, it's not for the people, but rather with the government, with the people at the point where the gravitational pull is equal. And so I serve as a bridge to amplify those ideas from the civil society that make sense for the state, and also the idea from the state that makes sense for the civil society without orbiting anyone.
Yeah, but in that case, you want to stay in that situation because here, for example, in Latin America, it's very difficult to do something like that. You work for, not with, and if we try to have a movement that is related to work with, it's very difficult. In the case of Taiwan, how was that? Because someone said, okay, you have to work with, or you said, no, I'm Audrey Tang and I work with you, not for you.
Right. I think the three principles I have entering the cabinet are relevant.
Okay.
Right? One is radical transparency. So at this website, sayit.archive.tw, you can find throughout the past 8 years, every single journalist visit, every single lobbyist visit, and many of the important cross-ministerial meetings. The entire transcript is online.
Yeah.
And so I do not accept lobbyist visits without them speaking on the record and published to the internet. And it changes how they lobby because they know the future generation is listening. So they always talk about the global good, future generations and so on, because they don't want to the other people in the future generation look down on them, obviously. And so that is the first thing, is radical transparency. The second thing is voluntary association.
Okay.
So the idea is that instead of giving orders to my staff, the staff are the people who choose to work with me, and we have internal democratic systems, including like raising pseudonymously new ideas, petitions, live streams, and so on. So it's a little small democratic staff that grew from just 5 people in 2016 all the way to more than 500 people in 2024. And so that exercise means that it's a very flat, not hierarchical relationship between me and the people who work with me. So that's voluntary association. And finally, I think also equally important is civic participation.
Yeah.
So it's not me on behalf of the state telling the civil society what to do.
Okay.
It is the civil society through the spaces that we design, like presidential hackathon, like the ideathons, like the joint platform, V-Taiwan platform, and so on, surfacing the best idea. I'm just the amplifier of those ideas. So through civic participation, radical transparency, and voluntary association, I manage to work with the government and not for. But these conditions are very important because the entire nation knows these are the conditions upon which I enter the cabinet.
Okay, that was the conditions. And I think that if we are thinking in deliberative tech, what is that? And I want to read this part of plurality because I love it, where is here. Because this is, I think, the spirit of collaboration. In a part of plurality it says, if you don't want to deal with the community, the material has not copyright, so take anything you want to leave the rest. Ask not why is nobody doing this. You are the nobody. I love it because it's I think that I must collaborate, or if I want to say something about this, okay, it's my word, but I think that I need to say something and share. And thinking on this idea, I said, okay, maybe this deliberative tech, if you can explain us what is that and how we can understand it, especially because, for example, I'm not a programmer, I don't do it, but I work with technology. So sometimes we are thinking, okay, you need to program something to understand what is the technology or participate. So what is this deliberative tech?
Sure. To deliberate is to listen to each other and to think about something in common, right? And so it is not broadcasting. Broadcasting is just one person that speaks and everybody else listen. Okay. It is more like broad listening to make sure that a lot of people can listen to each other. So that is deliberative technology. In Taiwan, we use many deliberative technologies, one of which is called Pol.is, Pol.is, which asks people, how do you feel? How do you feel about a circumstance?
How do you feel? No, what do you think?
Right, exactly. Because everybody is an expert in one's own feelings.
Wow.
And instead of jumping to conclusion, like you should do this, you should do that, we first say, how do you feel about this situation? So in 2015, for example, the Uber drivers, the taxi drivers, they were having very different worldviews, but we asked all of them and the passengers and everyone, how do you feel about the situation? And there are some very nuanced feelings, like people feeling, I think the rural places are underserved by Uber. I think they should be served more. Or people think it's okay to have surge pricing, but undercutting meters is not good, and so on. So they're not like one-line statements. They're very nuanced feelings. And people, instead of saying it's a good idea or a bad idea, people just say, I resonate with the feeling. This is also how I feel. Or that's I don't feel that way. And so it is much softer. It's not voting directly. It is to get people's feelings visualized, like taking a selfie, so that all the participants know how people's feelings are clustered. So you have people who feel this way, people who feel this way, and so on. And another good thing that Pol.is does is that it has a scoreboard. It shows the best ideas that bridges across those divides. So, for example, the rights of the passenger insurance is very important. Oh, that is a bridge that bridges the different islands of feelings. And so once after 3 weeks or so, we have those bridges shown, then people are actually visually seeing them moving closer together because they now reach the understanding that actually on most topics, we resonate with each other's feeling most of the time. And so we can just table those very abstract ideological debates, like whether it's a extractive gig economy or sharing economy or whatever, and then focus on the practical things that we all resonate with, and that become the law, and Uber become a taxi fleet in Taiwan, and many urban and the rural taxi co-ops work together, and now it's a win-win-win situation. But the reason why we can get to this so quickly is because it's not a preset of issues that is determined by solutions by any particular state planner or private sector planner or anything, but just people sharing their feelings and gradually coming to a common understanding.
Bienvenidas y bienvenidos a este momento estelar en donde traemos educación al mundo financiero con la palabra financiera del día. ¿Qué nos toca hoy? Decimos A, B, F. ¿Cuál es la palabra? Fondo común de inversión. ¿Qué es un fondo común de inversión? Algo que habitualmente, por lo menos yo escucho cerca mío, algunos amigos, familiares, que invierten en este instrumento financiero. Entonces, ¿de qué se trata un fondo común de inversión? Y todo esto de la mano de los amigos de Cocos App, que justamente lo que buscan es democratizar las finanzas. Entonces se mezcla la educación con la tecnología y el mundo de las inversiones. Y con fondos comunes de inversión se refiere a patrimonios sin personalidad jurídica, constituidos por las aportaciones de múltiples inversores. La sociedad gestora, en ese caso, ejerce la administración y representación del fondo, que asimismo, o sea, el fondo en sí, se encarga de invertir estas aportaciones en distintos activos e instrumentos financieros, que van modificándose y evolucionando con el mercado, y de ahí se determinan distintos resultados, ¿bien? Que pueden ser positivos o negativos. Y eso son obtenidos por los inversores partícipes. Así que acá lo importante es que la unidad de inversión justamente es la participación, ¿ok? Bueno, tienen tanto como fondos comunes de inversión y otras alternativas más en Cocos App, en Cocos Capital, que hacen que el mundo financiero sea más fácil. Pero por eso siempre es importante que aprendas sobre esto, bien, que te instruyas para poder tomar mejores decisiones. Mientras tanto, Cocos App ayuda a que tengas libertad financiera para saber qué puedes hacer con tus ahorros. De hecho, hoy Cocos App tiene más de 400.000 clientes y está resultando mucho. Así que gracias a los amigos de Cocos App, hoy tuvimos esta palabra financiera que fue fondo común de inversión. If we want to implement this in Argentina or Latin America, we are very different. I'm thinking which or what stages are necessary to reach that kind of deliberative tech because here, of course, we have doubts about AI, and we have, I said, issues with corruption. So if we are thinking in Latin America, if we are thinking in a framework, for example, what we must do or what we need, for example, connectivity. We don't have 100% of connectivity.
Yeah. Nowadays, if you want to implement this, it's easier than 10 years ago when we first started doing so. In fact, there are now ways for you to simply record a WhatsApp voice message or to call a toll-free line and so on and speak your mind. And there are AI models now that will just take the voice or even the way you express your expressions and so on and still count as a valuable input. You don't have to type all the time now. In Taiwan, we have worked with the Stanford University so that it's 450 people statistically representing the whole of Taiwanese society in rooms of 10, so 45 rooms. And those chat rooms, they are entirely moderated by robot. So a robot moderator will nudge you saying, speak more, or if people interrupt, they can only do so 5 seconds at a time and so on. And it automatically summarizes people's voices, those things they say, and so on, again, into group pictures. But you don't have to type and press like or unlike anymore. It is a much more interactive experience that anyone can do. I don't know whether Glenn want to add for the Latin America context.
Yeah.
I think, one critical challenge is to find institutions that are credibly neutral that can administer these things. And, one has to think about what those are in Latin American context.
Yeah.
Perhaps it is something like Ethereum. Maybe it's actually a really interesting platform for having discussions across differences here. I don't know the Argentine context super well. We were recently in Colombia. There's some think tanks there that are really well respected across lines of difference that are really interesting, convening bodies. But I think that that's a really good thing to look for. Really to be incredibly neutral is to be at that Lagrange point. It's to be in the balance between
It's
these
very
different things.
difficult because we have a history, and sometimes we need, maybe more conversations related to the citizens. It's very difficult because we have social media, manipulation, and sometimes I think that maybe politicians who are a silver generation, they don't understand how the technology can help us. So I don't know if we must create a movement and talk more about this.
I think that really helps. And like in Finland, I was just in Finland for 5 days a few weeks ago. They didn't start with this national conversation on Pol.is with almost 1 million votes. They didn't start from that scale. They start from very small scale, like small cities, councils, and so on. So even in a small neighborhood, they can still use this technology to find the divisions and the common ground of a maybe just 5,000 people city. It's a very, very small place, a village or even. And then all they do is just they read the result before each city council meeting. So it's not a referendum. It is not high stake. But it's just to get people into the habit of talking about their common ground across differences. And once they start doing so, then there's more and more people organically spreading this idea because the tools we use are open source. Anyone can start a Pol.is conversation. And so when the city councilors become acquainted to it, they eventually moving on to municipal things like healthcare and so on. And finally, after a few years, did this, what do you think Finland national conversation, right? So starting small is always easier. If it started even in a credibly neutral organization like Sitra in Finland, they can't really get everybody on board so quickly. But starting from a 5,000 or 10,000 small village or place or city council, anyone can do that with just 1 or 2 councillors introducing this idea or 1 mayor and so on.
But I'd also say, very important thing to think about. Many social mobilizations in Latin America, many in recent years, so many have led to nothing. Over and over and over again. You think of all the wasted time and effort that people put into this. They came to nothing, sometimes worse than nothing. You think of the things that happened in Chile. They brought in a government, they brought in a constitutional process, didn't work. Another constitutional process didn't work. Think of all the time, national effort, attention that's been wasted. If we just use some of these technologies that we know have a track record of delivering consensus, think of just how much cheaper that is than wasting time getting angry, this, that, whatever, and nothing comes of it. Think of the frustration and cynicism that creates. If we just put a tiny fraction of that energy invested in tools that we know are engines to harness those diversity, harness those differences to create things rather than just to dissipate it in heat, we could get so much further, so much quicker, have societies that work so much better. So to me, this is just a no-brainer. You know what I mean? It's just you'd have to be very, very wasteful not to think that it would be better to take a little fraction of all the energy that goes into those things and put it into something we know can really make a difference for making progress.
Yeah, I understand it. But I think that it isn't easy for us because we are with this kind of problems, the economy, inflation, and football, Messi, blah. And I think that this is important. This is something very important. For example, I'm a teacher. I give classes in the university. And sometimes when I can, I try to put an idea, because I think that it's important. And now I'm thinking related to democracy. Is voting a right, or maybe it's a privilege? Because if we try to have a better decisions, we need to have a very good education, I suppose, or a critical thinking. And sometimes we don't have money or time to create that spaces. So maybe, okay, we are a country that we are in democracy, but I'm not sure if it's a really, if it's a right. Maybe sometimes I think that it's a privilege. What do you think?
I think it's a practice. It's like playing piano. The more you do, the better you get. And so in Taiwan, anyone under 18 years old even, anyone literally, can start a citizens initiative and for people to vote on it on the Join platform. So join.gov.tw. So some of the most impactful citizens initiatives were started by people very, very young, like banning plastic straws from bubble tea takeouts, like getting to the school 1 hour later so they get more hours of sleep, because that improves the score, actually. As a teacher, maybe you know that adequate sleep is very important. So even before they turn 18 and get the right to vote nationally, they already have the way to start gathering 5,000 signatures online and making sure the education minister, the ministers have to respond to them. And we held more than 100 of those collaborative meetings with the dedicated participation officers in each ministry to respond to people's needs. And on those 5,000 signatures, you have a discussion board, again inspired by Pol.is and by Iceland, by Better Reykjavik, that you can have the supporting ideas, you can have the contra ideas, but there's no reply button, just like Pol.is. Because if you have the reply button, people start arguing with each other. But if you only have upvote and downvote and no reply button, the best idea, the cream of the crop, floats to the top. And people can actually see that both sides have very good arguments. And then that's how bridges are built. Instead of attacking each other, you see the best arguments on both sides and you synthesize those arguments. And so the idea is the civics teachers, the teachers in high schools and so on, they see this as a education in competence. It's not just the literacy, which is consuming information, but a competence in contributing to democracy. And when the student get this exercise, like literally every week or so, it's not just once every 4 years. It's not telling them when you're 18, you will understand, right? So the more they practice in democracy, the more bandwidth they have enough in the democratic input into their schools policies, their neighborhoods policies, the national policies, the more adept they become when they finally turn 18 and can vote. And so I think that critical period between 7-year-old and 17 years old, that is very important.
Okay.
You know, in terms of right versus privilege, the way I think about it is I think you're absolutely right that, you know, it's not simply that we just want every person say whatever they want. What we really want is something that adds something to the conversation. But on the other hand, what adds to the conversation depends on what else is in the conversation. And it's much better to have someone who brings expertise in their lived experience, expertise in local conditions, expertise in areas that we don't think about, rather than just replicating the expertise of the experts, right? So I think that we absolutely need to value expertise, but the problem is often we look to narrow expertise. Actually, to get the expertise, what we need to do is take whatever's in the conversation and seek what's not in the conversation to bring that in. That's really the best kind of expertise.
Okay. But the power is centralized. So maybe someone needs to make the decision and say, okay, we are going to start to talk about democracy, but in an easy way at school. But that is a decision that makes the politicians. So, on the other hand, here in Argentina, we need 4 years in a government and another 4 years, and it's a lot of time that maybe sometimes I feel that we are wasting. So, returning the other question, if we need a framework to say, okay, at the beginning you need 100% of connectivity, or I don't know what else, and which stages do we need to have a digital democracy with open source, blockchain? How do you imagine that?
Well, one thing is I wouldn't overestimate how centralized power really is at present. We tell stories about that, but there's an expression in Chinese which is that the heaven is high and the emperor is far away. So in theory, the emperor has all the power, but the reality is the emperor doesn't know what's going on, and there's much more space to do things than you might think that there is. And you know, putting completely aside politics, until I went on sabbatical and met Microsoft Corporation, and you might think Microsoft Corporation, hierarchical company, but I've found that it's actually very hard to get anything done at Microsoft by persuading the CEO. Because the CEO doesn't know what's going on in the business, doesn't see all the things, doesn't even have the power to order very much in the company. The reality is that power actually resides in the fabric of the different people working at the company. And if you don't assume that the imagination of centralized power is the reality, but you actually look at the way the conversations work, at the civil servants at different places who are actually making the decisions, you actually find much more possibility for action than if you assume everything is centralized and that the only solution to this is just come up with some new, quote, decentralized system, which ends up very quickly being actually quite centralized. So you have to look for the pockets of possibility in any system. And I think that's one reason Audrey calls herself a conservative anarchist, because actually there already is no state. And what she's trying to do is protect that and have us understand that and lift that up and offer those possibilities, rather than tearing down something which isn't centralized anyway and replacing it with something that imagines that it's decentralized but actually is maybe even more centralized than what exists.
Yeah, and the internet really is core of that, because without internet, it's very difficult for anyone in any large system to have those horizontal connections. And so when I was the Minister for Digital Affairs, I insisted on broadband as a human right. So that definitely is like layer -1, right? It is something that absolutely must happen first. But above that, I totally agree with Glenn that the power dynamics of many large organizations are already somewhat polycentered. So it's not fully decentralized, but it's not centralized either. There are multiple centers and they interact in interesting ways. So the way that we need to work is to work with those reformers, work with those officers that are also sympathetic to the ideas of the activists of the civil society. Maybe actually after 5 p.m., they're also part of the civil society. You just don't know about it yet, right? So part of the Gov0 or G0V movement in 2012 is to have a safe space, to have anyone really, even pseudonymously really, suggest better ways to do government websites or government's work in a way that doesn't reveal their identity if they choose to be pseudonymous. And we discover that many very good early Gov0 projects are started by middle-level public servants. And they need this space to upward manage their ministers. They need a place for demo to show a better way of doing things. And once it gets noticed by the civil society, then the minister will assign them to do the thing they're already doing anyway, right? So this kind of camaraderie, solidarity across sectors is what's important in a civil movement, such as Gov0, and by extension, the plurality movement also works across sectors this way.
It's also critical in business innovation. There's a wonderful book by Annalise Aksanian called The New Argonauts, and what she shows is that what really made Silicon Valley and Boston work was that you had the universities and you had the venture capital networks bringing people across corporations together that then started new companies. If you just said, oh, Silicon Valley is centralized, let's go off somewhere else and do something else, you wouldn't create nearly as much dynamism as you create by just offering neutral platforms within these supposedly centralized things for the people who have a shared interest to come together and create something new.
And you are working at Microsoft, and when you have these kind of ideas, there is a possibility that Microsoft said, "Okay, I am losing my power, or not." Who it works?
Who's Microsoft?
Microsoft as a company who is
what do you mean?
The most important company, one of the most important companies who is working with AI.
But who are you talking about at Microsoft?
Okay.
I mean, this is the point. No, but this is the point. The point is that like Microsoft is an interesting fiction or an interesting myth or an interesting religion or something like this, but it's not a person.
No, it's a company.
Microsoft, many people at Microsoft say many different things to me about many different topics, and I've worked in different parts of the organization, and within each part of the organization, there are different people with different attitudes, different cultures, all these organizations are very heterogeneous. And what you need to do is find pockets within something that can connect to pockets other places, that can form networks that then can persuade leaders in different parts of those different organizations to empower change. And of course, there will be all kinds of people who resist at different levels in different ways, but not always the top, not always the bottom. It's actually very rich and complex.
No, for example, I know people who works in Meta, for example, and maybe if I ask something, they say no. They try to talk about something that I want to know because I'm a journalist, so I'm always asking. And they have limits, and I feel that you are free. You can say whatever you want, and that is very important. So if we are thinking
I'm on sabbatical, so I have the reprieve from whatever comms relationships I've had in the past. But again, even there, those are the comms people. And then there's other people who maybe even are more senior, who have a different opinion than the comms people do, or the legal people who have a different opinion. And the key is to know how to use these different situations and to work, all these companies, they have teams in trust and safety. They have teams that think about decentralization. All these people have different perspectives and are trying to move their organizations in their own directions. And it's harnessing those different possibilities that makes it possible for you to do interesting action.
Okay, and you think that maybe an strategy, you say, okay, I think that it must be more decentralized, and you propose that to the company. You can do whatever you want, or it's more like, okay, that's your opinion, and you can do it, but by your way.
Well, maybe you have the freedom to do some things at a very small scale on your own, and maybe then you find people in other organizations that have similar attitudes, but they're not really given permission to work with you, but they can do it a little bit, and then maybe soon you find a network, and that network has some strength to it, and then you surface that to a high leader who blesses that and gives you. So that's how you make change in these organizations. If you just view it as a monolith, then you have to ask, what does Microsoft want? But then it's almost never going to be positive for anything that you're proposing. But if you ask, are there people at Microsoft? Are there groups at Microsoft that could work together to persuade leadership that this could be a direction? That might be much more possible.
Yeah. Maybe 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, I interviewed to Brittany Kaiser. Do you know who is she? She's a former employee from Cambridge Analytica. She worked at Cambridge Analytica, and she was thinking in a movement called Own Your Data. And in that movement, she proposed a compensation for the use of personal data by companies. And what do you think? If we have a compensation, maybe internet will be more expensive related to money, because now we think that internet is for free, like it's very cheap. We give our data, and we don't pay for internet. So if we change that model where we said, okay, if you want my data, you must pay, I don't know, 0.0001 of Bitcoin, because I'm saying, or I'm giving you this information, this data. What do you think, that maybe a model like this can change internet or no?
I've been a big advocate for a long time of moving somewhere in this direction, but I think it's also very important to understand that it's quite a nuanced and complicated topic. And the reason is there is no your data. Is this conversation mine? Is it yours? Is my genetics mine, or my father's, or my mother's, or my sister's? All of these data are mixed together because everything is social in data. So the question is, absolutely, we need some way to give economic value to people in a system, because otherwise, this whole thing about neural networks work by back propagating signals, really of value, of what helps determine the output. But the neural network in the code is just a small part of the real neural network, which is the neural network that connects all of our brains, which have neural networks inside of them, through the code to each other, and makes big neural network for the whole world. And if that system isn't back propagating to our brains the signals of value, then we're missing most of the value, most of the computational power in the system. So that has to happen, but it doesn't happen just in an individual way. It has to happen in a way that takes into account the social nature of the data, the same way that a neural network sends the signal to many nodes and they get combined in a node. So we absolutely need to develop systems in that direction, but I think many of the simple own your data ways of thinking about it actually miss how these things really work.
And also, we need ways to determine the use of such data, such that instead of providing a copy of the personal data to someone, and that someone may use it beyond our initial control, they can bring the code to our data for us to do the computation and give the result in a way that doesn't compromise privacy or trade secret or anything. And nowadays, there are very good privacy technologies like zero-knowledge technologies and so on that can do so at scale. And so instead of like 20 years ago, the choice was you either give a copy or you don't get to use those data, or at least you use a very bad anonymization technique and you get very low quality data. Now you can get very high quality use of data without even touching the raw data or compromising privacy. So this dilemma has already been solved theoretically, but not many people or not many governments invest in such what we call data fabrics as highways or airports or train stations. In Taiwan, we managed to convince our budget office, like investing in data fabrics are like investing in highways, except it's much cheaper. But I think more and more the Europeans, for example, are also starting to think that something like that is important as a public infrastructure, because then you can have, private airlines, but the airports needs to be interoperable in a sense. If an airport doesn't connect to any other airport, what use is it, right? So this kind of things with a high network effect, these kind of things with a high public utility, maybe it does make sense for the government to invest in it without controlling its uses, just making sure that the privacy and the zero knowledge promises, the homomorphic encryption and so on works in an interoperable way. That is worth a lot of investment.
And even better, allied governments work together, co-invest to create a cross fabric.
That's
that
very
then
interesting.
enables them all to work together. And that sounds a little bit crazy, but of course, this is precisely what military alliances have been formed for originally to do, to get the different pieces of hardware to interoperate with each other. And so this is exactly the sort of thing that governments could do. That's what built the internet.
It's very interesting, the idea of work together. The countries work together. And internet is around the world without limits. And do you think that maybe...
Well, maybe not entirely without limits, but countries
we know
that
something
want
about
it to not
firewalls.
have limits should be working together to make sure that it has as few limits as it can. Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
But maybe if there isn't, I don't know when, but if we are trained, for example, to looking for regulations that regulate the AI, for example, and we are thinking, okay, for Argentina, this is the regulations. For Uruguay, this is the regulation. Brazil, this is the regulation. And internet is around the world without limits. So maybe in the future we have a very big regulation or something. How do you see that? How do you imagine that? With nations or something around the world, or a combination?
Yeah, I think it's already in combination. As you know, the internet governance is multi-stakeholder. So it is like the rule on the sea and so on, where, of course, there are jurisdictional boundaries and there are navies and so on, but there are also shipping companies and they also have a seat at the table, right? So the idea of multi-stakeholderism has always been at the core of internet governance, because people recognize their jurisdictions are overlapped. The state has, of course, in many jurisdictions, a interest in upholding the law, in police enforcement and things like that. But equally, the civil society have a interest in ensuring the freedom of expression, of assembly, of end-to-end encryption and things like that. And the private sector also has an interest in ensuring that the commerce can work in a way that cross those borders without having to, sign N times M more privacy agreements between the different jurisdictions. So each stakeholder brings to the table a different set of overlapping jurisdiction concerns. And the great thing about internet governance is that it is, in a way, like plurality, to find the commonalities across those differences and celebrating those differences as new perspectives in how internet can grow. And if we can learn from that, internet governance, instead of pinning it into, only the UN members, each member one vote, can determine the future of internet, which, by the way, would exclude Taiwan. Right? If we don't go back to those multilateral norms and just amplify the multi-stakeholder norms, I think we're in a very good place.
Yeah, and that's not just the internet. I mean, rivers don't respect the boundaries of nations. The Andes Mountains don't seem to respect the boundaries of nations. So if we're going to have reasonable ways of dealing with the fact that we actually do live in this physical world, and that if we destroy it, we probably don't all survive. We have to get used to the notion that the lines we've drawn on maps aren't the only lines that exist out there. Like Mother Nature has a say on lines as well. So,
Okay, let's talk about something that you can explain. What is a quadratic voting?
well, I think quadratic voting is part of a much more general idea,
Okay.
which is very simple.
Okay.
You just choose one candidate from a list.
Yeah.
Very, very simple thing, not very much information. I mean, you think a lot of things about the election that you just go and convey one vote for one candidate, not a lot to say. And it's not that surprising, therefore, that it leads to all sorts of problems. Like, you get with two candidates, you choose the one you dislike less, and one really bad gets in as a result. Not so surprising. You can allow people to do more than that, and you can have systems that allow for both more diversity but also more consensus. So very simple thing is you just let people vote for as many candidates as they want. Why not? And then, you can vote for one of the ones that's the leading candidate, but you can also, if you like someone who's not the leading candidate, vote for them too. Maybe they actually get more consensus than someone else. And whoever gets elected is going to have 70% of the vote, not 50% of the vote. So that's already a really nice improvement. So then you say, okay, how do we let people express more? Maybe they want to say, oh, I really like this one, I really dislike this one, I like this one a little. That's what quadratic voting lets you do.
Or you can think okay, I like this politician with this idea, but not with this idea. Maybe you can choose ideas, specific ideas.
Yeah, and so quadratic voting just takes one step and lets you say in favor a lot, against a lot. And all that the quadratic part does is make sure that you don't just say, I love this, love this, love this. It gives you a reason to say, I like a little bit, I like a little bit less. It's just a mathematics to be honest and to balance. But that's just one step. And, we can do more sophisticated things like this. We can think like, oh, you have this type of perspective that's similar to these other people. Let's try to balance that out and hear something that brings people together. Or maybe we let people express how they feel, as you said, on different issues, different types of people. Maybe we can take that all into account as we make a decision. So all these are ways of just allowing more rich expression from more people, and we come to a point that we can all live with together. So quadratic voting is one technique along this. It has very mathematics and arguments for it, but it's not a silver bullet. It's just some part of the process of allowing us to express more with more people, so we can all come to something we can live with.
It's a high bandwidth democracy, but it is not the highest band. You can always improve the bandwidth of democracy by including more and more nuance in the input.
Yeah, you think communication, we went from you talk, you write on tablets, you write on paper, you print, you have radio, you have television. All these are adding richness to how we communicate, and all these techniques are just doing the same for how we make decisions together.
Santi told me that you implement quadratic voting in, I don't remember where.
State of Colorado legislature.
And how
but
it was.
But also in video games.
Okay.
Civilization.
Best-selling computer game of all time.
Okay.
Best, in Taiwan.
Presidential hackathon.
Yeah.
So many places we do these things.
And how is working? And how do you think that maybe in Latin America we can use this
they
method?
They already did it in the city of Gramalos in Brazil.
In Brazil.
For the city council, and they're doing it in the favelas in Rio. To make decisions about their soccer captains. So many people are using this in many ways in many places, and it's permissionless innovation. So it's people go out there and make it in their own way.
Yeah, there may be 100 times more people using it, but we just don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, because I say, the name is quadratic voting. So I say, it's very complex, but no, if you're saying that in Brazil or in other places, it's useful. Okay. And I want to know your opinion about the Pope Francis, our Pope Francisco, because he said, I think that he is against the technocrats, because he said the future of the economy, civilization, and humanity itself will be played in the field of technological innovation. Intelligence without monopolies that favors peace against technocratic power. Comments about this?
Amen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Pope Francis is one of my favorite thinkers alive today, a true inspiration for so much of the work that we do. And, people often ask why I don't like AGI as a way of talking about future of technology. And I think very simple. You go to the Bible and you say, what does the Bible tell us? It says, don't make idols. Don't make something
idols
that you worship. That's kind of what I think AGI is about. And
Yeah.
what does it tell us to do? It says, love your neighbor as yourself, and that the peacemakers are the children of God. So I think if we approach technology just with those simple ideas, don't make idols, love your neighbor, peacemakers are children of God, I think we get very good guide to the type of technology we should make, and that's really all we're doing together.
Yes.
Yes, I think that we have the power, not something like we don't know what has the power. We have the power, each one. And now we can move on to Javier Milei, who is considered maybe the greatest libertarian representative, actually. But recently, he had a meeting with WorldCoin that has issues related to privacy, and with Meta. And here in Argentina, for example, if we want to stop the AI that is being developed by Meta, we can't stop to give our information and our data. And what do you think about Javier Milei related to this idea of being the greatest libertarian?
Well, I was raised by an Argentine Jewish woman, niñera, and her brother is someone who maybe you know, Carlos Maslatón.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to say, ¿qué onda? ¿Qué onda tu niñera, Javier?
Yeah.
Sí, Carlos Maslatón.
Niñera fue Sophie Maslatón.
Sophie Maslatón.
Ella ahora vive en Israel.
Okay.
Pues, so I feel very strong personal connection to this president. It's an incredible honor to have someone with that kind of personal connection to, come to that position of power. Very interesting. And, Audrey says she's a conservative anarchist.
Yeah.
I think maybe President Milei would say the same thing. And, what I would say to him just is you don't want world government. You don't want one world coin that rules everything. You don't want one model that rules everything. That's what libertarianism is about. So I hope we have a chance to talk to him about the importance of open source, about the importance of many people having slices on these things. That's what freedom is about. And so I think that's where the values that I believe I learned as a boy come to speak to all this.
And
Okay.
instead of just telling Meta to speed up or to stop, we can also steer.
Yeah.
So, for example, the Taiwan sovereign model, the trustworthy AI dialogue engine, the Taide, trained by our science minister, that is based on Llama 3. But the way we steer Llama 3 is not determined by Meta. It is determined by Pol.is conversations across the country about how we want AI to behave, and also on the face-to-face conversations in Taipei and Tainan that together we call alignment assemblies that determined how AI models in Taiwan should behave. And then we use what's called alignment tuning to tune Llama so that it fits the Taiwanese norm. And so the more your hands are on the steering wheel, the less you need to hit the brake so strongly, as I said. And so this is also a very libertarian idea. It is to each community, to each person, one can steer the technology toward a different direction. It's called permissionless innovation. And that is also very important.
Yes, I agree. And 2 more questions, because you are short in time. You have a little time pass here in Argentina. I want to understand what is the difference between network state and network society?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I think the way that network state has often been described is that people find each other around the world with a group where they can agree on everything, and they get together, and then they don't have to have the problems with democracy and dealing with other people, et cetera. And I think that, to me, that's kind of the opposite of the idea of a network. That's actually going way before a network, because the idea of a network is that you have many connections to many different people, and each connected on different things. So I'm a Jew. It connects me to President Milei. It connects me to people in Israel. I'm also someone who's very concerned about the plight of the Palestinians, which connects me to people in the Arab world. It connects me to it. And I'm have a history as a libertarian. I have a history as a socialist. Each connects me to different people. So I'm very fragmented. And I think that in a network, if you really want a network, you need to be able to deal with that complexity. You need to deal with all these different connections. You have to different people. You need to have many different kinds of government, many different kinds of group, multi-stakeholder, all connecting. That's a network. So I think the way a network state is usually described to me is the opposite of a network. It's actually going away from a network, because it says I want to just have the group of people that I'm with on everything. And so I believe in the network. I think the network should govern things. And that's why I'm concerned about the network state as it's often described, because actually it goes away from that and back to this notion that I'm just with my tribe, where I'm with everything. That's the opposite of a network.
Yeah, so in a sense, the choice of the word of the state kind of says that you're exclusively a citizen of a state and not the others. But if you can think of ways like I'm simultaneously citizens of 15 different network states, then that becomes less of a problem.
Okay. I love the idea. I prefer, of course, the idea of network society. I feel identification with that idea.
If you're an anarchist, you don't really want a lot more state. You want a network. Of course. Maybe it's a moment that I'm saying, okay, I'm an anarchist too. I never say that, but I think that with the things that I'm listening now.
You're wearing black. That's the color.
And look at this.
Black and red.
I'm from June.
Exactly.
And Audrey, you are, of course, I'm a fan of you, and you are the first digital minister, transgender and post-gender.
Non-binary.
Non-binary.
Not binary. And you are a reference for many people. What does it mean for you to be this kind of representation for many people? How do you feel if you realize that you are very important, of course, because you are the first digital minister, and because you're thinking post-gender, of course? How do you feel?
Yeah, I'm non-binary, not just in gender, but in everything. So in 2016, when I first became digital minister, the HR form I filed not applicable to the gender field and also not applicable to the party affiliation field. I will go on to file many N/A or */*, which means whatever. Right. So in my mind, I don't have this notion that half of the people are my people people, and half of the people are other people, right? I don't have this notion that these are my partisan comrades and these are the other parties. I don't have that. And so it extends to every aspect. If I now feel that there are some people that I just don't understand where they're coming from, I think it's my problem. It's not their problem. And I end up spending more time with them and more curious about them until I can see the world from their worldview. So it starts from like very small things, like just spending time with taxi drivers and Uber drivers, right? To very important conversations. For example, during this book tour, we deliberately sought left-wing and right-wing media leaders and so on to balance our worldviews, because it does take two wings to fly, right? So that is non-binary to me. And I think this idea of there's no half of the world farther away from us and no half the world closer from us is also quite liberating, because it means that we're facing each other just as people to people and genuinely curious about how you feel about things instead of just labeling as my people or other people.
And Audrey often says she's non-binary about being non-binary as well. So rather than just saying it's they or todos, todes, todos. It's todes and cualquiera. So whatever pronoun you want.
Yeah, you can't offend me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Try to offend me.
I really love that idea, because I have that sensation, but not related to my gender. It was related to my opinions. Because sometimes it's okay, I'm thinking that this is in this way, but of course it could be in this way too, because we need to put a label. Here in Argentina, it's a very big problem. Here we have a very big, enormous polarization, and it's a problem because here we can have a chill conversation for that reason. And when you try to explain that, okay, if I think that this is white and this is red, maybe we have many options. Maybe we have options that we don't know which are that options. So thank you for these words.
In Taoism, they say a lot, be the water. And I think, in a politics, you often say, I'm on this side, I'm on that side, maybe I'm in the middle. But often it's easiest to be on all sides. And it sounds like it's hard, but that's just what water does. Water is on all sides.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So thank you very much. I love this conversation. I suppose that the people will understand many things that we don't understand in Argentina and Latin America, because we are not always thinking on this. But it's important to do something. We need to do something. I know we can talk more, but we have tools, and Plurality is a platform. And I will continue to read the book because I like it, what I read, and I want to be a part of that, because I think that it is necessary. So thank you very much for visiting us here in La Última Frontera. And of course, here we are with Audrey Tang, the great Audrey Tang, and Glen Weyl. And of course, we are saying goodbye, nos vamos. And do you want a special goodbye?
Yes,
absolutely.
Live long and prosper.
Well, we say peace and long life, and you can say live long and prosper. That's the way the Vulcans say goodbye.
Okay, live and
peace and long life.
Peace and long life.
And you say live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Crucé la última frontera.